Hello, I am reporting from the inaugural Southwest Audio Fest. I think Gary Gill and Lou Hinckley did a great job picking this hotel. It's a gigantic place, but it seems like a very good venue for the show, and there's a lot of room for expansion, so I think that was a good choice, and I think the show is going well. Some highlights of rooms I've listened to. First, I have been a planar person my whole life, but without excuse, I somehow have never managed to hear Sound Labs electrostatic speakers, even though I've had Martin Logan's for 18 years. Anyway, first time I've heard Sound Labs, I like them as much as I thought I would. These Sound Labs are relatively thin. We're used to seeing the giant, like room divider Sound Labs. They're like 8 feet tall and 3.5 feet wide. These are much narrower ones, only 3 or 4 widths worth of electrostatic panels. And they were driven not by atmosphere, as is usually the case, I believe, with Sound Labs, but by David Burning 845-211. I don't know if you've seen those, but those are gorgeous amplifiers. You can use a pair of 845s or a pair of 211s. I thought the thing sounded great. It's just right up my planar dipole alley. I love electrostatic. You don't have the oomph in the upper bass to lower mid-range, which is why I was never a fan of Martin Logan's CLS. Or CLX for that matter either, but I don't consider it a full range system, but you put a REL 6-pack with this thing, and I think you have a complete full range system, maybe not still fullness in the upper bass, lower mid-range, which is still an issue for electrostatic hybrids as well as pretty much any hybrid, but it's a wonderful system. Anybody looking at panels, especially electrostatic panels, has to look at the Sound Labs. And very interestingly, they were being driven beautifully by 60 watts of David Burning 845s. I actually don't know if they're 845s or 211s, but the amplifier takes both. Wonderful sound. I visited Oz Tarrant and my dear friend Greg Barone in their room. And this year, instead of MBL, Greg is showing with Oz's Lancia speakers. That's a conventional box speaker, but has a plasma tweeter. And listening to Greg's tape deck, he has the new Ultima, I think 5, with the outboard power supply here. The overall sonic balance was definitely warmer and a little bit more ground up that I personally like, that I honestly typically don't hear from the MBL. So I actually like the slightly warmer balance with Greg's tape machine. Ken Songer has his new driver, the S1X, in his S1 closed box speakers, the S2s or the open baffles. I defy anybody to go listen to these things, listen to vocal on these things, and tell me if you don't agree that things are just unusually natural sounding. There is just an in-the-room believability with those field coil drivers. I've heard it every time I've heard his speakers. You go there and listen to it, and you report back and tell me if you don't agree there's something exceptionally natural about sounds, especially voices, because I follow voices mostly, on his speakers. Von Schweikert, Damon put the room together himself this time, and he was demonstrating a small mid-size Von Schweikert audio speaker with 2 of the new Shockwaves. So they redid the Shockwave, and now it looks like in a beautiful glass epoxy cabinet or something in the back, and it sounded wonderful. The Von Schweikert rooms always seem to sound very good. I saw Hans and his wife and Calvin Johnson in the Infigo room. This year, Hans was working with Stenheim in a giant room. Sounded very good. I always like Hans's electronics. Ted Denny was putting on his usual elaborate demonstrations. This time he was using Macintosh. I don't really recall him using Macintosh before. He was using Magico speakers, which has never been my thing particularly. And I have to say, maybe it's the Macintosh electronics, or I think he had actually a very good room. The whole thing sounded really, really good. Much more satisfying to me than I usually hear from Magicos. So the Ted Denny room was, I think, exceptionally very good sounding, natural sounding for Magicos. Our very own What's Best Forum member, Todd Binnix, is some kind of avant-garde whisperer, because at Capitol Audio Fest, you know, I'm usually, I might say something's not my cup of tea or whatever, but at a show, if something sounds great at a show, that's a salient impression. If something sounds bad at a show, you can't really tell because things often sound bad at shows. But those avant-gardes at the Capitol Audio Fest, I think it was on Dart Seal, sounded bright, bright, bright. I couldn't even listen to it. You were like listening only to the tweeter. Something was just not right. However, our Todd Binnix has avant-garde Duo GTs here with, not tubes, but with the built-in iTron electronics. And I'm telling you, he played my Eva Cassidy Fields of Gold, which I've heard not a billion, but maybe like thousands of times. And it sounded wonderful. No brightness, no edginess, and that's with the iTron, not even, a Viva Audio SET, which is what I would put on it or something. I don't know. Todd is this is now only the second time in my life that I have heard avant-garde not sound bright. The first time was my friend Ali in Beverly Hills with the stunningly finely tuned avant-garde trio with bass horn systems and the single tube David Burning SET. Joshua, Believe High Fidelity. Oh my gosh, Joshua was using small speakers, but everything else was huge. He must have brought, I don't know how many thousands and thousands of pounds of Aries Syrah. I got to hear the new Aries Syrah triode FET hybrid. Each amp weighs 500 pounds, and he had a phalanx of row after row after row of huge Aries Syrah bucks. The guy is going to be in traction in the hospital carrying all this stuff home. But I'm not a big fan of these small speakers because I don't like any small speakers, but the electronics were absolutely wonderful. He was also demonstrating a prototype of a gigantic, it looked like an 18-inch, if not a 21-inch passive subwoofer. I wouldn't mind a couple of those to play with myself. His room was wonderful. I wasn't familiar with the small speakers, but it sounded great. John Wolf, Classic Audio. Classic Audio is one of my favorite rooms at Capitol Audio Fest. Here, John is demonstrating a smaller model, and instead of pairing them with his usual atmosphere amplifiers, which he's had forever, the Novacrons, I think they are, he was using homebrew 300B amplifiers. I was listening to them with Albert Porter, and we both agreed it sounded a little bit smoother and sweeter than I'm used to anyway from the atmosphere. So I say, John, I like these homebrew 300Bs of yours. I think they're a wonderful match with the speakers. The speakers, as always, sound completely wonderful. Jazz, piano. Every time I hear those things, I like them. Classic Audio, that is. Finally, a speaker I don't hear very often, German Physics, an omnidirectional speaker. I thought it sounded very good. I'm partial to non-conventional speaker topologies just naturally to begin with. These were relatively small German Physics, not the gigantic thing with the mechanical arm that moves in and out on remote control. These were just pretty small floor standers, maybe 4 feet tall, 4.5 feet tall. I thought it sounded very good, and I'm not familiar with Accuphase electronics, but these were matched with Accuphase, and I think they're cool speakers. So that is my first day initial impressions report. I will report back in the next day or so. Bye for now.